Family, party people, what's happening with you? Welcome back. It's another weekly episode of the TRENT Project. It's your boy, live in the flesh. I'm so excited that you're here. You could have been anywhere. We know we got playoffs going on, but I don't think you missing anything tonight outside of, you can get to the Timberwolves later. They still going to be on. But man, we're excited. We're excited that you're here. This is going to be a phenomenal conversation. So much that's going on all around us that could easily tie into this very question. So I want y'all to take a moment and invite somebody. Send the link, share it. It's going to be a good time, man. Get as many people in here as you can. Shout out YouTube land, shout out Twitch, Maverick.tv. Speaking of Maverick.tv, you can get the membership for free while we live right now. Okay. While we're live on YouTube and Twitch, y'all can hop over. We got people gifting memberships left and right. People that want to lift you up, man, gift it to you. And so come on through. While we're live over here, you're missing so much exclusive content that you're not going to find on YouTube, on Twitch, anything like that. That is going to be amazing. Okay. Yeah. T-Wolves play tomorrow. Okay. Bet. Yeah. They need a break. They need a break. Them Nuggets getting
their hands sore, man.
Oh my. Bro, they back. No, I ain't gonna do it. No, Diddy. Yeah. So this is gonna be a phenomenal conversation, like I mentioned earlier, man. So I'm excited. I'm gonna do another poll after seeing everybody, have their picks a couple weeks ago. Has picks changed? Who y'all want win in the finals? Before we jump into this, who y'all think is gonna be in the finals? Who y'all got win in the finals? Because it looked like Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is looking at sweet potatoes, mac and cheese, turkey, ham, dressing, the whole nine when he see Dallas. So I don't know. It ain't nothing but eating time over there. So I'd love to see you guys' thoughts briefly, and then we're going to jump right into this stream. Shout out Baxter in the YouTube chat. Isaac Suarez, I hope I said your last name correctly, brother, over on YouTube. I haven't been back in years. And crazy to be back and to be watching y'all with a podcast, kinda, and other channels other than gaming, and seeing the YouTube channel just grow so much is crazy. Man, we appreciate you being back, bro.
Yeah, grateful for you, fam. Thank you.
Grateful. OKC all day. You need your C's to bring it home. Bless your heart. If Knicks win it all, it's gonna be the worst. It's gonna be worse than Philadelphia Eagles Super Bowl win. That's gonna be a good one. So Twitch is low key still loading up for me. I don't got no premium subscriptions. I can't skip ads. So here's what it is. We're gonna catch y'all. We appreciate y'all. All right, let's dive into this prayer. Jump quick to the video, and then we'll be back for some conversation. All right, Lord, give us your wisdom. Sit with us in this time. In Jesus' name, amen.
Hey there, everybody. What's going on? Welcome to another episode of the Truth Project. Super excited that you're here with us tonight. On behalf of Dion, Luke, Grape, and myself, welcome in. Do me a favor, whatever platform you're on, make sure that you invite somebody else to come join us right now. Text them, call them, whatever it is you do, Vox them, hit them up, tell them to come hang out with us here for the next hour or so. And also, if you are not a member, make sure that you take the opportunity to explore that opportunity. There's many benefits to becoming a member of our organization, our program, including coaching, as well as access to additional truth projects and other things that go on throughout the channel. Tonight, though, I want to jump right into what it is that I want to talk about. And here's what I want to talk about. I want to talk about what types of wisdom are there and what's the real difference, right? Practical wisdom in particular, and then spiritual wisdom. And when I say practical wisdom, I'm specifically talking about wisdom that comes from the world, right? How do we navigate these two things? How do we navigate what's practical wisdom and then what is spiritual wisdom? And how do we know which one of those are we supposed to move in a given situation, right? Perhaps you have a financial decision that you need to make. There's some practical wisdom. And then I also believe that there's some spiritual wisdom, right? there's a passage of scripture in Jeremiah 33:3 where he says, call on me and I will answer you and show you things you did not know. And so this is interesting, right? The Bible continues to talk to us also about wisdom, and all you're getting tells us to get understanding. And it says wisdom is the principal thing, right? The scripture speaks to us about these things on an ongoing basis. Get wisdom, right? And so I think it's important, and Ecclesiastes really hammers it home and tells us that we should wear wisdom around our neck. It even refers to her, a wisdom as a her in the female connotation, and the reason for that, from what I've studied, is because it keeps giving. So it has a mothering almost type of effect to it. It keeps giving. Wisdom keeps giving. It has that type of impact on us. But how do we know when to use which wisdom? Practical wisdom and spiritual wisdom. How do we know? And is one more effective than the other, right? Because then how do we kind of measure it against our spiritual lives and culture? Because we know that there are very smart people who are scientists, doctors, different things along those lines. And let me say this: is intellectualism the same thing as wisdom? Is being highly intellectual, incredibly smart, is that the same thing as wisdom? People who have incredibly high IQs and who teach at MIT and Harvard and some of the greatest schools that have to do with technology and different things along those lines. Is that wisdom, and is that intellect the same? And which one of those should we move in at all times is the question that I have for us tonight. So without further ado, that's where we're going to go. Practical wisdom or spiritual wisdom? Which one is better, right? And how do we know when to use one and not to use the other, or does it even matter? Let's talk about it.
All right, man, I'm excited. There were a few thoughts and questions in there, man, that I heard, and I'm excited to dive into, man. So without further ado, again, invite somebody. It's going to be a good conversation. Without further ado, invite somebody. PD, the floor is yours.
All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome in. Bless you guys. Hope that your week is going well. It's a good Thursday night for you. Listen, let's jump right into this conversation here, okay? Let's get right into what it is that we're going to talk about here tonight. Here's something that I want to just put out here up front. For those of you who've been hanging out here, we've tackled wisdom before. We've tackled wisdom probably several times here in a couple of different ways. But tonight is another way for us to look at it, because oftentimes we've come specifically from using wisdom, right? Biblical wisdom, from it being God's wisdom, etc. But we haven't really had the opportunity to speak from the wisdom perspective that I'm talking about tonight, or that I asked the question around tonight. And so great. My thoughts were in putting this question together were, all right, so how do we kind of navigate life, right? Because I believe that there is practical wisdom, but then again, I know that there's biblical wisdom, spiritual wisdom, if you will, wisdom that is not of this world. And so one of the things that I asked in there, man, was like, so how do we know when to apply them? And do we apply them everywhere? As a Christian, do you apply wisdom all the time? Is it all spiritual? And is all wisdom spiritual? Or is there practical wisdom? Is there a practical wisdom, and is it all created equal? Is wisdom wisdom? I talked about those who are intellectually astute, right? Brainiacs, very smart, MIT individuals, things along those lines. People who, graduated college and they're 13, and now they're in some kind of program to be a doctor. A neuroscience scientist, right? A surgeon of some kind. Those people exist in the world, right? And so, is that the same kind of wisdom? Is that the same kind of wisdom that you should apply? Because when I look at this word here, I look at the scripture, and the scripture gives us a lot of different ways, great, to look at wisdom. Like there's a bunch of different ways for us to look at wisdom, but the world also offers us a couple of different ways to look at wisdom. So let's look at, just briefly here, some different sources of wisdom. Okay, I took some notes. here, there's practical wisdom, okay? But basically, and I'm gonna break them down for you. So knowledge and skills gained through life experience, right? Helps us know how to navigate challenges, make decisions, build things. Then there's philosophical wisdom, right? A deeper understanding of life's big questions, the pursuit of truth and meaning. And then there's spiritual wisdom, insight into what people would say is a quote, higher power. We're going to say God, connectedness to a greater purpose, moral principles and values for living. And then there's emotional wisdom, right? Self-awareness, understanding of your emotions, your own emotions and others, and healthy emotional regulation. So if you've never thought about wisdom in this way, because I know we haven't had this conversation on here, tonight's a good night for you to look into this and think about this. So again, we're going to look at 4 areas: practical wisdom, philosophical wisdom, spiritual wisdom, and emotional wisdom. All of these things are wisdom, okay? The question becomes is, when do we use them, and are they all created equal? Does God even offer us, from the Christian worldview, for those of you, this might be your very first time, somebody also said that they hadn't been here for a while. Thanks for coming back. Thanks for hanging out. You're always welcome. We spring forth from a Christian worldview, meaning that we move from where the scripture is and go forward from there. But because we're open to having conversations with anybody and everybody, no matter where you come from, no matter what your worldview is, we want to open the door for conversations like this. There are some people who just live philosophically, period. That's just the way that it is. And you have other people that are incredibly regimented, so they're practical in what they do, right? And there's people too that don't necessarily move in emotional wisdom. I can't wait to get further into this, Sean, to be quite honest with you, because emotional wisdom isn't something that I even thought about either, but I was preparing some information for something that I'm doing, and I ran across this, and I was like, I never even thought about the emotional wisdom. I know we say things like emotional intelligence. They actually have a book out called Emotional Intelligence, and there's also people who teach on emotional intelligence, which basically boils down to emotional wisdom, right? Self-awareness, being self-aware, and things along those lines. But as we look at this, Sean, I want us to realize that clearly there's 4 categories, so that means that they're all not the same. Off the bat, they're all not the same. These things do not match. They're all not the same. So when we think about each type of these different wisdoms, right? A mechanic, for example, might be wise fixing a car, right? But lack philosophical depth, right? So even when I was talking about the teenager, right? The teenager might be like super brainiac smart, 14, going to MIT, getting ready to build the next rocket ship. You don't want them driving your car though, right? There's just some things that you're like, hey, I don't want you doing that, right? There's some things you don't want this particular individual doing. And so there's a development that has to happen, right? And I believe that wisdom is cultivated in some different ways, Sean, to be quite honest with you. I believe it's cultivated in different ways. I even believe spiritual wisdom is cultivated in different ways, right? I feel the same way about practical wisdom and etc., right? But I think that we need to think through this a little bit here, because I've heard people say that there's gangsters, dudes who are known gangsters, and they'll be standing on the corner. They're like, the wise one is here, the wise one. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, right? I remember in my own neighborhood growing up, these brothers be like, oh man, that's the wise one right there. Now this brother was a killer. They're attributing wisdom to this particular individual, calling him wise, speaking about his name on that level. And so I'm thinking to myself, man, how do we really wrestle with this word, Sean? Right? D, how do we really wrestle with this ideal of wisdom and its real purpose and what it is for? Now, let me read to you these last 2 things here real quick, just to help out a little bit. James, chapter number 1 and verse number 5 says this: if you lack wisdom, you should ask God. I'm just gonna leave that there. I'm just gonna leave that there, and we can come back to that later. But because I want to deal with that text. If you lack wisdom, you should ask God, right? And then there's Proverbs 2:6. It says this: "For the Lord gives wisdom; from His mouth come knowledge and understanding." This is so interesting to me. God gives wisdom, and from His mouth comes knowledge and understanding. So with that being said, y'all, I want us to think through this a little bit here. Who do you believe is wise? Do you have an author who you believe is wise? Listen, there's a couple of books that I have here sitting on my desk from a couple of different people, some authors that I love, that I think are really deep thinkers, but they're not Christians. But they're really deep thinkers in the way that they think. And I would say that they have some wisdom. I personally would say that they have some wisdom. But as a believer, how do I apply that? How do I wrestle with God's wisdom? Because God says, if you lack wisdom, ask me. So how do we work through these other wisdoms that exist in the world? Let's talk about that.
Yeah, I like all of that. Again, everybody get your questions in, get your thoughts in as we're doing it. And as we're at it, man, over there on YouTube land, man, drop a like on this video. Like this video, get it on the algorithm, man. Let people who haven't necessarily caught it yet come through and catch it, pop up on their algorithm for them to catch it, man, by the like. Shout out Kane over on the YouTube land. I think there's a difference between knowledge and practical wisdom. I guess mainly I'd say knowledge is for a very specific problem, but wisdom can be applied in a more broad sense. I've always felt like all wisdom and spiritual wisdom went hand in hand, because they both speak to how the world works in a way which is rooted in God in the first place. So I really like that. I like the 4 levels of wisdom that you identified, right? I think the one that obviously I love the most is the emotional wisdom aspect of things. And I think maybe that is what people are referring to when they're saying emotional intelligence. But I guess the crazy thing is that term intelligence is thrown around so often because we all know so much but do so little. And so it's like, well, do you really know, or is it just a suggestion? It's just something you heard. It's just something that, you may have taken a note on here and there, but it's not really something that you believe, because if you believed it, it would be in some way, shape, or form a part of your life, right? To some extent. And so I think there's 3 things that I kind of, landed on here in my notes from that. In answering the question, like, are all these considered equal? And I can open this up, and then, again, you guys drop your thoughts and questions. I think the one perspective I take is balance and not extreme, right? All 4 of them at some point should be intertwined in our lives, especially if we're looking to live our life biblically and live it after Christ. Like Christ and his ministry, him being 100% God and 100% man, like he didn't lack any of that. Practical, philosophical, emotional, spiritual. Like he was all in that, through and through. And so I think that is the goal, and that's the aim. And I think along with the aim of building that in our lives, we have to move in balance. Like there are so many people who are so spiritually tuned that you lack emotional regulation to decipher between if what you're doing is practical or just straight out of religion. Right. And so there's that imbalance there. There are so many people who are so extremely philosophical. I want to find the meaning of things. I want to pursue after that you find a way to intellectualize yourself out of being an emotional being. So you rationalize, but you don't feel. And because you don't feel, you don't allow yourself to process disappointments and things of that sort that over time causes your body literally to deteriorate. There are people who are so in tuned emotionally. I'm self-aware. I know where I am. I know what I'm doing. I know who I am. And at the same time, have the capacity to use that as blinders to ignore the other areas that are just as important. You can know where you are, who you are, and what you're doing, and find a way to intellectualize yourself out of needing to know and pursue wisdom, purpose, and have things to put your hands to. If I know where I am, but I do nothing about where I am to grow, then am I really doing something with what I know, with the wisdom that's available to me, with the resources that are around me? And then again, practicality is amazing. Practicality is necessary. But there are some things that practicality, I won't say doesn't do anything for. It's just there's a necessity for more. So I can put into steps how to, and I guess I'll answer it this way. That's how we have a lot of Instagram and social media gurus, right? So there's a lot of how-tos. There's a lot of do this, do that. There's a lot of lists that tell you what to do and how to go about it. But there isn't enough depth behind the practicality given for you to understand even why what is being given is something you should do. There's no in-depth meaning behind it, which then questions the value of the practicality you're giving. So how much value is this list of overcoming depression really for? Like, what's the value of it if I can't even understand, one, how I got here, two, why I'm feeling the way I'm feeling repetitively, and then three, other important considerations that I should look to that actually makes sense of the list I'm given. And so I feel like all three of those have to be, or four, I should say, have to be somewhat intertwined, but there has to be a balance. So I have to look to imply that in my life throughout the course of my life. And since this is an infinite game, I'm not ever supposed to get to a place where I've maxed out 100%. But I can definitely make an effort to pursue that with experiences and encounters. So that was the longest one I had. The other two are just simply saying time and place. There's a time and place for all of that to be used. So, emotional wisdom. I think there's a time and place to regulate emotions. I think there's always a time and place to regulate emotions. But I do think that instead of tapping into that as your main focus, when we're in a spiritual atmosphere, that makes sense. When we're in a practical atmosphere, I don't think I want to necessarily tap into emotional instability, especially if I'm not healed. Because I can't really trust the way I think I can't really trust my emotions. Let me just say that I can't lean into my emotions if I'm not healed mentally. And so there's an aspect there. But I think there's room to dig into that. I just think there's a time and place for all of this to be put in. And then the last one is, let me go right, not by age, but by maturity. None of those descriptions that you gave was determined by the age or number an individual is. Gray hairs, as much as we love to culturally play around that gray hair is an identification of wisdom, there are people who got gray hair and are just as immature as they were when they were 12. So
stupid.
It's just bat crazy, right? So I can't look at you and listen to your age and automatically assume that because you've lived longer than me, that you have a substantial amount of wisdom to lend to me for where I am and where I'm looking to go. And so I think maturity, time and place, and having a balance all screams to a need for standard. And I think that standard ultimately is God. And so that's how I'm able to flush all that out. And so
I will say to what you said in here, you should expect for someone with gray hair to have some wisdom. I don't think it's wrong to have that expectation.
No, yeah,
but you're absolutely right. No, I'm agreeing with you. 1,000% right. Even though you have that expectation, you can't make the assumption.
Yeah,
you can't. I also have a question here too that I think is important. Do we as Christians throw the other wisdoms out because we're spiritual? Do we think that we don't need practical wisdom? Do we think that we don't need emotional wisdom, right? Do we think that we don't need philosophical wisdom because we're spiritual? Do we believe like this isn't necessary for me? Are we not taught that in church?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would love to hear everybody else's thoughts in the chat off of that. I would say, is it what we should do? No. Is it what we've done? Yeah. Because I think in a lot of ways, we've put so much emphasis on, as long as you have the Holy Spirit, everything is good, which is true in so many ways. But I think how it's received is, as long as I believe and have the Holy Spirit, I don't got to do nothing.
That's my question.
That is where I think the misalignment is. If you believe that all I need to do is just, say a prayer and come to the altar and cry my eyes out one day, and I don't have to continue doing the work, I think that's an issue. I'll say it with this example, and then I'll leave it to the rest. I heard a story from one of the coaches that I followed. I've shared a lot of thoughts from, and he's really good, but he was just emphasizing a woman who was older, and she was having a huge struggle in her marriage. At this point, they had been married for a long time, and she was just recognizing that he was unwilling to change. He is just simply who he is. Anytime that he would look or she would look to address anything, look to challenge anything, look to encourage any transformation and any differences in order for the relationship to remain healthy, he wouldn't do it. Not only would he not do it, but he would continue to rest in who and how he's acted and moved previously, and would continue to say, just pray. Right. Just pray, God, trust God, all those kinds of things. How he treated her was poorly. Yeah. His behavior was poorly. His mental capacity was poor. And it was leading to a lot of different spaces of abuse in that relationship. And so she ultimately connected with this coach. And I love the analogy he used. He said, have you ever had a flat tire? And she was like, well, yeah. I said, okay, what do you do? What happens? What's the important thing that you need to do when you have a flat tire? And she said, well, it's probably important that you pull over. I said, okay, well, what happens when you have a flat tire, but you're near an exit? Do you pull over? Do you keep going thinking that you can reach the exit and then change your tire? And she said, well, I don't think it's a important thing to keep going to the exit. I said, why not? I said, because eventually the tire is going to fall off, and not only is it going to do damage to the initial tire that it's flat, but it'll also do damage to the rest of the car. Mm-hmm. And he said, interesting. He said, man, what you have is a flat tire. What you have is a flat tire, and you need to pull over and do something about that flat tire before not only is the wheel axis and everything about that tire is going to be damaged, but the rest of the car, AKA the rest of your household, the rest of your life, the rest of your family, the rest of who you are will be destroyed along with the flat tire you're trying to drag to the nearest exit. And he says this, he shares this, she's hearing up all those kinds of things. She actually, it was that conversation, she began to get her values and things in order, and began moving towards divorce, because it just simply was not a healthy place for her to be in. I think that story in and of itself, I think really, really shows the importance of not just looking to do the work to get someplace, but recognize that I have to continue to do the work to remain in such a place, to remain in such a healthy space in order for everything to function properly. Because the moment I don't, I'll have a flat tire and something has to give.
So wisdom in this situation told her that this wasn't going to work. Is this correct? And
I would say so.
And his conventional mentality was just pray. We just gonna ask God to fix it. And so, is that how God works? Because there are some people who pray, right? We say pray and let it go. The Bible tells us to pray without ceasing. It tells us to not doubt when we pray, to not do anything. So what part are we leaving to wisdom? And then, like this man, what part are we leaving to prayer?
Yeah, I think prayer is necessary for both sides. I think prayer is necessary in order to know what to do. And prayer is necessary when you don't know what to do. And I think
I like that. I like that.
And so it's necessary regardless. But and here's what's so interesting, because this is where you can almost get caught in trying to trap God into some logical box where it's like, well, God will never and God will always. I think God will ultimately do what he does. And he has a supernatural way of just performing things without you doing anything. That's very true. Like, God has a way of doing that. I believe that. And I think it's an exception to the rule. It's not the rule. And what I mean by that is, as I've read through scriptures and I study it, I don't see a lot of miracles, a lot of supernatural activity where somebody had to be somewhere and do something in order for the miracle and God's movement to really be shown in their life. If I go through the Gospels and I look at the miracles, the 2 fish and the 5 loaves of bread, if the little boy never gives his lunch, I'm not saying that miracle would never be recorded, but it's not done in such a manner that is still moving lives today. If I look at the miracle of 4,000 fed, like, they take the little that they have and they give it to Jesus. There was always some format of participation for what God was getting ready to do for it to come to pass. If we go Old Testament, this is what's amazing. Jeremiah is in a hole and is given a vision from God that somebody was going to come by and he was going to ultimately need to purchase a land. God's just like, you're going to need to purchase a land. You're going to need to purchase a land for greater purposes. He wasn't necessarily revealed what the purposes were greater for at that time, but he chooses to trust God. So he purchases the land. He says, so I purchased the land. That's just kind of how the text tells us. Yep. God told me to do it, so I did it. And that land was used for greater purposes than Jeremiah could have ever imagined later on in the text. I just think in small areas like that. All right. When Elijah is in trouble, I believe is it Elisha? See, I always get them mixed up, but it's one of the two. On top of a mountain, enemies are Elijah. All right. And he's surrounded by enemies who are coming to get him, and they're trying to capture him. He prays, sure. But he's also obedient by staying still and where he's at. And it was fire that's fallen from heaven that's striking these dudes. So yes, God does so much of that. But I mean, it's supernatural. It's absolutely supernatural. And if Elijah is not obedient and doesn't stay put, does that really happen in the way that we read it? I don't know. And so I think there's enough evidence to say that there's got to be some level of participation in order to see that happen. But I don't put it past God that he can cause a supernatural stirring. But that, I think, in a lot of ways is also due to a willing spirit. And if you're not willing, what can God do? He won't force himself on you. And so it's a terrible combination and mixture, which I would go back to that same situation. And, you know, I don't know the context and details of this relationship, so I can never really assume something so strongly. But I would ask, was any of this shown to you prior to you even getting here? And were you actually moving in wisdom to say that this was something you should have stepped into? Because if that were the case, I find it hard to believe that if wisdom led you somewhere, that wisdom will no longer be available to sustain where it once led you.
I agree wholeheartedly.
And so if it's not wisdom, I mean, scripture tells us that wisdom is there's somebody who says it in this manner, but I don't think scripture says it this way, but it ties to what Jesus talks about. Wisdom will be proven by its children. Wisdom will be shown, you know, in due season, in later time, kind of paraphrasing there. But that I think is a very interesting thing for wisdom. Like oftentimes you don't see the fruit of wisdom immediately. It happens later. And so I think for it to be something that happens later, that there's a duration. There's a duration, there's a stability, there's a sustainability of the wisdom that's used. And I think that ultimately proves whether or not that was the best decision, right decision, or perhaps wrong decision. And you live with it and you move forward. So long answer. I hope I answered it. But that would be my thoughts on it. What about you?
I actually think, I mean, you said a whole lot, and I don't really have a whole lot. No, not in a way like you overtalked it. I just don't think I have a whole lot to add to it outside of the fact that, you know, man, I I don't think there's a couple of things. I don't think that the purpose of prayer, I'm trying to quote Ravi Zacharias. He said this. He said that the purpose of prayer is not to get man's will done in heaven, but to get God's will done on the earth. I think that's how it goes. So that shapes a lot for me. That helps a lot for me, right? When we think about even going into the purpose of prayer, like why am I praying? And then how do I use wisdom with that? So my thing is this, great. I'll just kind of sum it up here so we can move on to some of the stuff in the chat here. And so I think wisdom directs prayer.
That's good.
That's do you understand what I'm saying to you?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. So let me follow it up with this question then. So then how would you say one is able to determine if they are being navigated by wisdom in their own prayers?
Well, because we have to understand the nature of wisdom. That's how. Because wisdom is not foolish by nature. Wisdom isn't foolish by nature. Wisdom is going to give you insight and instruction that's going to lead to fruitfulness. Right? Like how do we know this? My son, if you will accept my words, right, and store up my commands within you, turning your ear to wisdom and applying your heart to understanding, indeed, if you call out to insight and cry aloud for understanding, if you look for it as silver and search for it as a hidden treasure, then you will understand the fear of the Lord and find the knowledge of God. This Proverbs chapter number 2, verse 1 through 4. He's given it to him. He's like, so wisdom has biblical wisdom, has a draw to God, to knowledge. And it's so interesting that he's speaking to his son, or he's calling him his son. It's like a father giving instruction back to the son and saying, please understand something. If your heart is sincerely bent towards seeking this, like you would search out silver, like you would search out gold, like you're like, hey, there's value when I get these two things. He's like, man, God will give it to you. God will give it to you, right? Remember I said in James 2, right? 1:5, if you lack wisdom, you should ask God. I love this, who gives generously without finding fault, and it will be given unto you. But when you ask, you must believe, right? Don't have your mind all over the place, because that's what it says. Because the one who doubts is like a wave in the sea, blown, tossed in the wind. That person should not expect to receive anything of the Lord, because they're double-minded. But when you come in with a sincere heart, wisdom's going to direct your prayer. Wisdom, you're moving, man. You're coming to this place and you're saying, you know what, God, I need some wisdom. This is my circumstance, my situation. You're gonna understand how you're pulling on that to prayer. Now you might think, I just need to pray for wisdom, but isn't it interesting here? Listen to the text. This is New Testament now, James. He says, if you lack wisdom, ask. It didn't say pray. It said ask.
That is true.
It said ask.
Yeah.
So I believe that and when you go back to Proverbs, right? We read in Ecclesiastes all the wisdom stuff that's in there, right? My son, if you accept my words, what I said, this is the same thing as this ask. So there's kind of like prayer and asking, praying and asking. I think they're just both a part of how we understand how to kind of navigate this thing with God. But James specifically says you should ask God. You should ask God, give me wisdom in this situation. That is prayer.
Yeah. And not even having to get in like a whole complete posture. There's so many times I've done that. Absolutely.
So we think, so this is what I want us, this is revelatory for me, because we think that prayer is a posture as opposed to an approach.
Explain the difference.
Okay. So we're thinking that if our Father who art in heaven, or in my Baptist come on, Jesus, I know that you're a way maker. And God, I know that you can do it. If God don't do it, it just won't be done. Yes. Can I get it? Right? So we think this is the only way. But James said, God, I need some wisdom in this situation that I'm facing right now. And I don't know what to do, but I know that you're the all-wise one. I know that you do. So give me wisdom. To me, it's an approach. It's not your hands folded. It's not your eyes closed. It's who you're approaching, because God makes that clear too. Don't ask great for wisdom. Ask God.
Yeah.
Wait. But, what if great has the wisdom that you need? Somebody asked a question here. We're going to get to that in a minute. But they said, what if God's wisdom and man's wisdom was in the same place, but man's wisdom was greater than God's wisdom? Is there a scenario of that? I don't think so. But if I'm sincerely seeking God, God might tell me, call Sean. If any man lacks wisdom, ask God. So God might tell me, call Sean, because Sean, watch this. Sean has the answer to the question that I have, or the connection to the person that I need to meet, or the room that I need to be in, much like my meeting today. Who can put me in the room in front of these people that I need to meet? Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So I think this too is wisdom.
That's really good.
From God.
Yeah.
while I may not come directly to you because I may not know to come to you, you might be the person that God uses to give me the wisdom that I need for the next thing. So if somebody wants to know how to run a channel like this, wants to do gaming, wants to build out something like this, well then who do I need to talk to? Well, you don't need to talk to D, because I could barely play the PlayStation. But you do need to have a conversation with Dion. You understand what I'm saying? So there's wisdom even in the connection of who you need to know. So that's my 25 cents that I put on.
Man, that was really, really good. Really good.
All right.
Wow. Yeah.
Sometimes for an old dude, I'm good. Sometimes for an old dude, I'm all right. Sometimes.
You still got it. Gotta get a little chant going. I mess with that. You got Twister deleting all his responses. It's exactly what he was typing. Heck yeah, man. I love it. So let's move on to some questions, man. I want to hear you guys' thoughts off all that. And then some. So I'm gonna start with. Let's see if there's anything in YouTube. Yeah, shout out Kane, man. Kane, I hear you, brother. He said, the adage with age comes wisdom. Does it work the same for spiritual wisdom? Like, is it possible for someone new to the faith to be spiritually wiser than an experienced person? I think I'm understanding what you're asking there, Kane. Is it possible for someone new to the faith? So assuming that maybe they, well, let me see. Does it work the same for spiritual wisdom in terms of age? Okay, no, I get you. Man, that's a really good question. I would answer it this way, Kane. I think God's wisdom is so limitless that it gives brevity for everybody to learn from each other, young and old, or, seasoned and fresh into the game. Like, I think that is maybe the best way I would answer that. Because I don't want to necessarily say, like, okay, if somebody is new to the faith versus somebody who's been in the faith for maybe 20 something years, I'm not automatically going, and I'm not saying that's what you're doing but in conversation, I don't think I would automatically assume that this person would be spiritually wiser. But I do think there is a case in place where that could be, right? Like, if this person has been a Christian for 20 plus years, but this other person just came into the faith and has only been in relationship with Jesus for a year, but perhaps this person has done more with their faith in a year than the individual has done in the 20, then I think that's what makes the difference. And I would say in that scenario, yeah, I definitely think that would make sense, because the person that's been a Christian for 20 years hasn't really applied their faith to the same extent. Like, this person is a Christian by way of church and by way of a church attendance and by way of, well, this is what I've grown up and known all my life. It hasn't been something that has actually revamped their character and revamp their daily living, versus somebody who just came to the faith and perhaps has experienced everything that they did prior to, but is so serious about the faith that they're willing to put everything to the test in their life, and they're seeing fruit from it, and of course challenges with it. I think that is definitely a scenario where you would say, yeah, I mean, I know they're new to the faith, but they're wise. They're wise. Scripture has such an interesting way of putting it too, where they're like, or not there, but Scripture tells us, it's so interesting. I believe Solomon tells us in Proverbs how the world can be so wise, and yet those that are in God can sometimes just not be in the same space. And I think that produces a challenge to the conversation, because what I think is implied in that text is that there are certain ways of maneuver that the world does, business, all those kinds of things, that is wise. Like, that's a very wise move. Like something that you were able to look beyond the moment and make a decision on that was going to be helpful and impactful to you in the future. And here we are over here with folded hands and praying that God would move and God would unlock the building for us and that God would, do all these kinds of things. And there's people who are in the world, don't have a relationship with Christ, but know exactly what to do in situations that involve business, finances, all that kind of stuff, and know how to multiply it. And it's like, imagine what that could be if you actually teamed with God on that. Like that, it would be a whole different world for you. You think you're winning, then try winning with Jesus. That's a whole nother life. And so hopefully that answered your question too a bit. If you had any other thoughts on that, let me know. But that I would answer it that way. I think it's possible. There's scenarios, but I think it just depends on what person we're describing as experienced. Because if it's somebody who's applying their faith for 20 years, I wouldn't say that. I think there's some things they've been through that this person new to the faith hasn't been through. And there's a lot of stuff that they can learn from each other. That's how amazing the wisdom is. And it's not necessarily one being wiser than another. I can say that maybe perhaps this person has underdeveloped wisdom. So they've encountered it, but it hasn't been something that they've been able to live up to, because it's a wisdom that is just beyond where they are and what they have the capacity for, and keep on living. And the wisdom you heard 5 years ago, you now have space to put into your life, because here and now in this season, it makes sense. And I don't know if I would say that person 5 years ago who had heard that wisdom was less wise because they didn't have room to put it in their life. I think they were exposed to a level of wisdom that they were able to live up to in such a way. So maybe that's a thought too, but I was all over the place on that. I hope that made sense. PD, if you had any thoughts, go for it. Okay, cool.
Nope. Good stuff.
Yeah. He said, I think so. And that's interesting. I would love to know what you were referring to when you mentioned, otherwise, why give us the capacity to even comprehend wisdom? And why tell us that wisdom is more valuable than silver and gold? I'd love to know where that was coming from, Kane. I think it was in the midst of our conversation earlier, while we were kind of sharing our thoughts back and forth, PD. So I just want to.
You asking me?
I don't know. I'm just trying to figure out where it was connected to. Because he just dropped that in the midst of the conversation.
So I was making reference to Proverbs chapter number 2, verse 6, Kane. Proverbs chapter number 2. So read that. This is a father giving instruction. Well, he's at least in the poetic format giving instruction to his son and talking to him about wisdom and talking to him about, pursuing it just like you would pursue silver or gold because of how precious it is. In other words, the preciousness of wisdom. I'm not sure about the capacity question that he had. Why would he give us the capacity? What was that? Do you still have that up? Why would he give us the capacity?
Yeah, so he said, why give us the capacity to even comprehend? So he said, we were talking about how prayer works. And he said, I don't think that's how God works in reference to prayer in terms of what exactly came. Fill me in on that, if you can remember. But he used the term capacity. Why give us the capacity to even comprehend wisdom?
If all you need is prayer, then I guess I'm assuming
that might be. That might be.
So because again, wisdom is a part of it. So when I ask for wisdom and I go into prayer, I'm asking the one who has wisdom. Because remember, James chapter 2 says, ask God. So ask God. So the capacity.
Okay. So he said, you asked something to the effect of, can we just pray stuff away? And so he was asking, I think he was saying, I don't think that's how God works in relation to that. So why give us the capacity to even comprehend wisdom if that's how he moves? Gotcha. And so I get you. And he said, otherwise, why tell us that wisdom is more valuable?
It was more of a statement. Man.
Right. It was more of a statement. I got you, Kane. Man, I appreciate you. Yeah, I love it. That's a good thought. Into the Maverick chat, man. Yeah, they was stay in here. The keyboard's on fire. Let's see here. So Glitch came in. He said you have to be wise enough to know what kind of wisdom to get from which person. I love that. Fisher, my guy Fisher, I believe all wisdom is unequal. For God said the wisdom of this world is foolishness to him. I think Jesus' wisdom is way far above manly wisdom. I would agree. Absolutely. So Twister coming in hot. So he said, man, this is an interesting topic. One, obviously, not all wisdom is equal in value. Biblical wisdom is by far the most important. Any wisdom that helps you be spiritual is the best kind of wisdom. Now, is all wisdom important? Depends on wisdom. Some worldly wisdom is counter to what Bible says. Some wisdom is don't put your hand on the stove because it's hot. Not bad advice at all. And some people need it, especially young minds. So I feel that. I feel that.
Yeah. So that wisdom isn't spiritual, but it's practical, and it makes sense to keep you from getting burned.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So we do need it. And do we need spiritual wisdom in that moment to not put our hand on the stove?
Do I need to know? Basically, and how I hear that, it's like, do I need to know a scripture in order to rebuke and answer to this stove that's hot and I'm about to put my hand on it? Like,
and the flames that I see coming from the fire pilot right there. I don't need to be.
I don't need to pray to know like this is not the move. I don't understand why we want to keep. Yeah, and I love that.
That's just practical wisdom. Just practical wisdom. Don't do this. So we can live in a lot of practical wisdom as far as I'm concerned, but we can't advance in practical wisdom because practical wisdom is limited to human ability only.
That's good.
Right? Where spiritual wisdom is not, hence where again we see in the scripture, pursue this, continue to pursue wisdom, wear wisdom around your neck, treat her well. Again, it speaks to wisdom in the female connotation because again, she keeps giving and giving and giving and caring and revealing and showing. So it's very interesting.
Yeah.
Put something in your eye.
Man, eyelash fell right in my eye, brother. I almost lost it. Shout out Keyshawn in the building. I don't think they are considered equal, but they have their own lanes to use them in. I think it's wise to go to others. I think you tap into all four subsets of wisdom when you realize you don't have all the answers. See that part right there? Yeah. You gotta have enough awareness to know I don't have it all. That's kind of where a lot of that starts. So I love that you said that. He said, and you seek out God. God points you in a direction and we use discernment where we go from there. A question I have is, how do we use discernment to determine if worldly wisdom lines up with God? I love that you used the term discernment there. I just was having a conversation with a client of mine yesterday. And we kind of got on this topic of discernment. And this is kind of how I defined it. Discernment is being able to see what's ahead based on the decisions you make now. And discernment is always a word that's used in Christian spaces. I hear it a lot on social media, and I don't doubt that the people that are using it know what it means. But I think it's one of those words that's thrown around so often that you can almost lose sight of what they're really referring to when using it. And so that's how I like to think of it. And it's exactly what wisdom gives you. Like, all right, I see what's happening or what's about to happen or where this could lead if this keeps happening. So like, because I can see God can give me something I can anticipate based on the current activities that I'm doing. That gives me room to be like, okay, is this something that I need to keep doing, travel down, keep experiencing, just go through the flow? Or do I just need to turn around right now? And I think a lot of times people will go so far down that road. I love Proverbs 27:12. The wise man sees danger ahead and avoids it, but the foolish keep going and pay the penalty. The wise, right? The wise. And so it's so amazing, right? And we all, like, if you think about it in like a real practical sense, there's so many areas of our lives where we've been the fool. Like, I know that me on the phone while I'm driving is an awful, irresponsible idea. But I did it because I was trying to figure out where I was going. Looked down, looked up, got in a wreck. Like we knew this. You know what I'm saying? Like that wasn't it. And yet we kept going, and then there was the penalty, right? And so it's like there's a lot of moments that happens where we do that. But I think sometimes we think that, well, if I'm already knee deep, I might as well just submerge. We're here, like we're here now. We're here now. We might as well go all in. And one of the things that I have loved realizing, and earlier on in my walk, it was actually something that I was shown as a part of just early spaces for me to grow in, was like, bro, you might be right there with the website typed in, and you might be right there about to hit enter and go right into it. You do realize you can stop right there. Like, you don't have to keep going all the way to the point of seeing all the thumbnails and all the other stuff, and then just boom, you right there. Like, you have an opportunity to stop right here. So like you have up until the moment you start doing it to change your mind. You don't have to surpass all of those levels of wisdom and then go into it and then just be like, oh, why'd I do it? Like, no, you can stop right there. You're in the car, you have the keys in hand, you're about to roll up on homie. You can stop right there. You can, in fact, get to his location. And you can stop right there. You do not have to go finish the job, homie. You got right there. You turn the engine off. You have your hand on the handle. You about to step out and announce yourself in the loudest way. And it's about to be nothing but hands. But you can turn that engine back on, brother, and drive right off. Ain't nothing happened. They didn't see you. Maybe they saw you, but you was like, you know what? I don't need this. And you can pull off. You were this close, but you didn't complete the mission. Like, wisdom gives us enough. It's so interesting. It gives us that capacity to see where this can lead. And Absolutely. It gives so much grace to where we can be right face to face with the poor decision and still have the room to turn around.
So which wisdom are we talking about? Godly wisdom?
How do we use discernment to determine if worldly wisdom lines up with God?
Okay.
Yeah. And so ultimately what I would just say, you pay attention to where it ends up. Where does this end up?
Where does it lead me?
Yeah.
Right? Where does this take me?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Agreed.
That's definitely how I would see. It's almost like trends, bro. Like it's so crazy. Sean John was the move in 06, bruh. As a kid, you couldn't tell me nothing. Sean John, baby fat, you couldn't tell me nothing, champ. I was rocking them clothes, brother. I remember that coat. It was tan, had the fur around the hoodie. Bro, I was feeling good when it got cold. Don't talk to me. You can't afford me. That's how I felt. That's how I felt with the coat. Imagine wearing Sean John today. You might get flamed gracefully. I don't even know what a gracious flame looked like, but you might get flamed real graciously or real bad.
They'll flame you for wearing.
Oh my goodness! What? You put on that same Sean John coat, talking about you looking fly. They gonna cook you. When we back in 06? You know what I'm saying? You got jean shorts that come down to your ankles. You only got air between your ankle and sock. Imagine. Right? Imagine. They gonna laugh you out of town. But it's because with human interaction or human capabilities or abilities that are limited to the human capacity, all that stuff it trends. It's here one day, but it's gone the next. But God's wisdom sustains. God's wisdom lasts. And we're able to look back on decisions that we've made a while back. And we can see how the fruit of that decision has not only revealed itself, but has told us, based on us making that decision, we made the right decision.
Yeah.
Because there's so much that has been built off of that that has been way more beneficial for us where we are and where we're going, and more importantly, who we're becoming, compared to settling for something in the immediate moment. And that's kind of how I would top that off. Fisher asked, is there any place where man's wisdom and God's wisdom can be applied where man's wisdom is better? I think you addressed that.
Yeah. I mean, that's a great question though, too. So
yeah.
I love that question. It's a great question. Yeah, for sure.
Fisher was addressing some of the example earlier that I mentioned with the woman in the poor marriage, flat tire example. He was just mentioning a lot about how faith without works is dead. And, you know, you can pray God to save your marriage, yet continue not to apply God's wisdom. And so the faith is in vain, right? So you need the faith, but before your faith to be true, you got to apply God's wisdom, right? So when that's not applied, it definitely doesn't move. And then he continues on, God can be moving in your spouse, having people talk to them and open up their mind because of your prayers. But as soon as they come to you, bringing old stuff, antagonizing them, that's not supporting your faith. And so I like that for sure. Some really good thoughts. Man, shout out Keyshawn too, man. I appreciate that thought. He said God pointed me to grape in that scenario. Man, I appreciate you. Yeah, God just, he's amazing, ain't he? Cause not me. Man, PD is making me delete all my responses. I feel you on that. So Sully says this, he asked this question. He said, anybody got Twister, bro, watch out, bro. Anyone got any wisdom to help Grape get that eyelash out his eye? Bro, watch out, bro. Watch out, dog. Watch out. Sully said, I don't know how much this aligns, so you could put it off for a little, but I've been curious, what should I do when I got some friends that kind of talk down on the religion? Like, should I try to move them towards the Lord or move myself out of that picture? Those aren't the only options, but you know, what do y'all think?
Man, let me chime in on this real quick.
Yeah, go for it.
Ask them how they've come to the conclusions where they are. Let them hear themselves talk about it, so on and so forth. And then just ask them questions about why they believe in other people. What are you going to say?
No, I just think Keyshawn is saying the same thing, man. He actually responded to him and said,
Key said something, go ahead.
when he had that conversation, he's like, start talking again about it. Just be like, hey, if you don't mind, what brought you to that conclusion?
Man, come on, Keith. He didn't even need me to answer. That's, to me, this is what brings people to this place, right? To be able to draw out of them this truth that they say that they're walking in, that they have. What bothers you so much about another person who has agreed that what they hear is factual, that is true, that it's something that they believe in, that they believe in a God that you say you can't see, I don't believe in a religion, I don't believe in any of that. What bothers you so much about that? Like, what is it? Like, what's going on in you that makes you struggle so much with this? What has happened, that's causing you to feel that way? And I think it's really important to kind of get to the bottom of it so you can hear them kind of rationalize it. And then you can start to have some, and again, my guy, crazy as it all turned out, Ravi Zacharias was brilliant at it. That brother would just, he would ask you a question. So in order to get there, you would have to have leaped over some other things that are standing right in front of you, right? You have to be able to help people see. Here's what happens with a lot of people. A lot of people don't know how to zoom out. A lot of people know how to zoom in. So they zoom in and they become single issue voters, right? So they get stuck on one issue. So it's the ideal of the plank or the speck in your eye while you look at the plank in your brother's eye, right? You have this speck, but you're like, man, look at how big the beam is over there. It's the inability to zoom out of your own life and say, wait a minute, I may not have all the angles to this situation that I need to have. Case in point, the conversation we were having prior to jumping on tonight, right? I may not have all the angles. I shared mine, but I may not have all the angles. Make sense? We got to be able to zoom out a little bit, right? So we're having that, and then D's like, well, maybe that's a reason to have it. And I'm like, well, maybe that is a reason to have it. You see, you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely.
But if you get stuck in one thing, you'll limit your life. Your life will be very small. It's just true.
Man.
It's just true. Thinking like that keeps your life very small, very, very limited. So
and so that's actually why. And I think if you were to ask that question to like a generic Christian in today's culture, they would probably tell you to remove yourself from those people off of that.
Of course.
But I think a lot of times the reasons why they would tell you that is because not only do they not have the stability to actually not just defend the faith, but still, and it's not even necessarily say that it needs defending, but it's just like to still have respectful dialogue and conversation. And I feel like whatever it is that they do is that somehow whatever they believe is rubbing off on you. So you don't want none of that on you, and you got to leave. I think in a lot of ways, people just don't know how to have those conversations. And so I think it's I would look at it as a good opportunity, man, to just learn why, again, not even to really repeat everything, but just why they believe what they believe. You will be so surprised. I've had numerous of conversations with people like this. I mean, it's low key on my YouTube channel too, from my hoops series, where I just went around and asked people questions in the midst of hooping, like thinking and real like philosophical like questions. The conversations that were carried off camera as well as on, it was so amazing to listen to how they arrived at such a conclusion. I hope I never forget this. I won't say I never, but I hope I don't. I was in an existentialism class. I've talked about it before in times past here on the Truth Project, but basically we ended up having a really fruitful conversation. There was an older guy, it was a younger guy who was a homosexual, and myself, and we were just sitting there having a good conversation. This was well after class. We were having it maybe more so like 20 to 30 minutes left with class, and then we carried it on a little bit afterwards. But bro, it was so rich to me because I was able to learn from those two guys how they arrived where they were. And a lot of it had to do, honestly, between two things, whether it was a experience they had that they had yet to really, really deal with in a proper way to help them see clearly. And honestly, it was just a matter of the will. Like this cat, and I remember talking to you about it, PD. I was so flabbergasted that day. I had never seen anything like it. This dude was like, yeah, so like, man, I went to a Christian school. I studied theology, front hand, backhand. I did it all. And you know what, man, this was just that one thing that I couldn't really get with. And it was dealing with his sexual preference. And I was like, wow, okay. So like you got to know who God is and what God is about and all he did. And he's like, yeah, it ain't for me. And so, having those conversations, obviously we got into those sexual preferences where he was like, yo, so do you, and it was so interesting. This is really how I knew I was getting sharper in my understanding. He asked a question that wording was so smart. It would have caught me tripping if I didn't catch it. But he was like, man, so do you believe that God loves, and I'm not going to get it all the way right because it happened so long ago, but he asked something along the lines of like, do you believe that God's love even transcends through certain things like homosexuality? Because God loves all, and God is, he was just asking about his love and doesn't his love make room for such things in some sort of way? And I was able to pick out that certain word that he used. And I said, man, that's so interesting that you use that word. I wouldn't necessarily say that God's love, transcends through such things. I think God's love is a standard that he sets out of love, out of who he is, out of his existence. And I think because it's the standard, it's for our protection and for our betterment. It's not to say that God allows such activity or humanity to interfere with it. But I don't think that's something that God would ultimately give a pass to in terms of his love being able to be shown through such a lifestyle or way of living. Because ultimately it would almost go against the standard that he has set. Because what you're essentially asking is God's love, exposed or shown, revealed, able to be received in such a way of living? Now, don't get it twisted. God loves these people just like he loves us all, but that does not negate the standard he set. And I think if you love him, you abide by that standard.
I believe, great, this might be a little controversial.
Yeah.
I believe you can receive God's love and not be transformed. Or I should say, know of God's love and not be transformed. I don't believe you can receive God's love and not be transformed.
Right.
I believe that you can know of it. I could believe that you can be aware of it. I could believe that you can say, I know he loves me, but I'm choosing me.
Right. Yeah.
Which is the case here.
Yeah. And I love that. And so I just think, I say all that though, kind of went on a tangent there, but I say all that just to say, like, be willing to have those conversations and ask them how they got to that conclusion. I
100%.
think you'll learn a lot.
100%.
You'll learn a lot, man. And you'll learn a lot of different perspectives on how people think. And even to the extent of things that might challenge your own view, but hopefully in the midst of being challenged by it, you don't allow it to be something that stamps you to a place where you say, oh, well, you proved this wrong, so I guess Christianity isn't the move. Because no matter where anybody is, nobody has been able to disprove an empty tomb. And that is the start and finish of the faith.
True
and
story.
So if you can't disprove that, so then that must mean that this is legit, which also means that there's other preferences outside of it that are really, key in some way for you to not be on board with this, and to each its own at that point. Right. And so I love what Dion said. It's also worth noting that learning about God is different than knowing God. That's when I was able to see that. I always thought of it like that, but to actually see it, that was different. I was like, whoa, for real? And I was like, yeah, so I guess and that's when we were having our conversation. You're like, yo, yeah, people go into theology classes to try and disprove God. They ain't even there to really get to know him.
100%.
And so because that's the case, you can know all those things from, and again, obviously, when you think about it, Pharisees, they were able to quote and do all that kind of stuff, but we're far from God, right? And so it's real. So hopefully that helps. Sully, I hope that helps. So Twister asked, and we're going to get to Twitch chat. They had some questions in there too.
Yep.
Twister asked here, he says, slightly off topic, but a little bit on topic. I heard a thought the other day, wanted to get your guys' thoughts on it, but the quote was, the opposite of faith isn't doubt, but rather it's having 100% evidence. So in other words, knowledge.
The opposite of faith isn't doubt, but having 100% evidence.
Oh, I think that's deep, but I think how I understand that is basically if you have 100% evidence of something, I think what they're trying to say is whenever you have 100% evidence of something, it lacks the need to trust something that's not seen in some kind of way. I think that might be what it's saying, but I could be wrong. What did y'all hear?
Go ahead. I have some thoughts on that too, but go ahead.
Yeah, if I heard it right, I think I like it and I agree with it. And I think that's part of the spiritual journey that we misunderstand. Like, I look at faith as like a flame, okay, like a staff. If you remember the Man Enough Challenge, great, the flame of faith. I feel like So I would say faith starts with like aspiration. And so what I mean by that is Grape needs to know that there's a standard out there, that there's a goodness, that there is a God, that there is that fruit of the spirit, things that he can aspire up to, something that he can aim for. But he may not know how to get there, what it looks like. So example, he can see this image of Christ, this love of God, this mind of Christ, all these things that he wants to aspire to have love, joy, peace, kindness, goodness, self-control, all these things. But how the fluff do you get there? And faith is that. And so it's almost like you're in a dark world of confusion, not knowing what is what. And it's just that faith that guides you, that you know what, I don't really know how to get there, but I trust in the God that has it and everything that he has for me. But I don't think God is trying to keep you there. He's trying to move you to a place of understanding. And so it's really about maturity. So when you first start out, yes, it may take faith to even get through maybe simple conversations and be patient with someone. Like you may be gritting your teeth as you are being kind instead of, cussing them out like you want to. You're like, Jesus said to be nice to your enemies. This don't make no motherfucking sense to me, but I'm gonna do it. And because I have faith that it works and that he said it works. But the more you do it, you start to grow into an understanding. And so you're not guessing when you're trying to love someone and they're being mean. You're like, yo, I've done this so many times. I've seen its effect on my broken heart. And I understand that this person is coming from a place of pain or whatever that has nothing to do with me. And so I don't need faith that this love is going to work, that this patience, this kindness that I'm giving out, I see it as the best way, the only way. And so that is where faith is replaced by that understanding, the more you walk it. So if I heard that right, let me know, Twister, and what do you guys think?
No, I think you hit it. It's progressive. It's revelatory, as you had alluded to. And that's the thing. You practice it with this revelation of it, this unfolding, this unpacking, this revealing of it. And so, I think it's a very interesting statement.
Yeah, I would agree as well. It's definitely like almost would say, you just gradually understand, right? And as you gradually understand, it takes you to different spaces. So it's almost like a checkpoint type thing, right? Like when you get to a certain checkpoint in that journey, there's more understanding that's given to you that is needed for where you're going next, and I think faith plays a role in a lot of that. And I think he even came back and said the person's point was trying to say when people have doubts about their faith, it isn't that they are doing something against their faith, but it's a part of the faith process. So,
hey, listen, in the book, remember the book, Grape, that I told you about, where she talks about,
Surprised by Paradox.
Surprised by Paradox.
Yeah.
Did you read that too, D?
I ChatGPT skimmed it.
Okay. She deals with this.
Yeah.
To a degree, right? Because you will have a scenario on one hand that looks like a full contradiction on the other hand, but there's truth mixed in the middle of this thing here, and you're walking it out, and to the natural mind, to the human mind, it doesn't make sense to do it. It doesn't make sense to move out in it. And I'll also add this. Just because there's evidence, watch this, y'all. Watch this. Just because there's evidence, it doesn't mean it's the entire truth.
That's true.
That's why they argue these things in court. Because they can be like, well, these look like grape shoes. They're size 27.
Jesus.
These look like his shirt. You know, it's a 3XL, extra long, right? That's his stuff or whatever. But it doesn't mean that because your clothes were there, facts, that you were there at the same time that a crime was committed. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and so it takes multiple evidences to come
evidences, right?
To tell one cohesive story.
That's it. You just can't say, well, we got evidence. And that's where some people fall short because they stop at, I see one evidence, but I don't see all of the evidence. So I'm missing the fact that there's more to this story.
Yeah. It's like investigators, right? Like if I'm a crime investigator, PD's a crime investigator, and we come up on a body, like if I tell him I think person A is responsible, but he tells me, nah, it's not person A. Well, we can't just leave it there because that would make you a bad detective to tell me that I'm wrong, but not give a reason as to why you think it's not A and it's somebody else, right? Like we both have to come with something. And I think that is the part where we all culminate the pieces of evidence that would draw to a conclusion without taking the evidences out of context to fit what we're looking for. Like that's a massive part.
Which is a huge problem.
Huge problem, yo.
Because we want it to fit what we're trying to say as opposed to allowing it to inform us what it is saying.
And that's why a lot of believers can't have conversations with people of opposite faith, because a lot of believers will try to contort their arguments. So now nobody is like respected and heard and understood, nor is anything even able to get to the bottom line. Because like I'm too busy trying to force you to see things the way I do and not listen to what your view actually says. It was a pleasure of mine to have conversations, and as I was coming to the end of my college experience with people that were of the Hinduism faith and the Buddhism faith, and just people who honestly didn't even know what they believed. Like, instead of trying to continuously tell you what I think and tell you how wrong you are, one of the things that always I love doing was just letting them talk first. I want to hear where you're coming from and where you're at. I mean, I've never had a conversation with somebody of the actual Hinduism faith. So to learn that was different than just reading it out of a textbook.
Right.
It was different. And so when we had our multiple conversations, and they weren't always faith-based, but it oftentimes came back to those places, you know, he wasn't as well versed. He was a young guy, you know what I'm saying? He wasn't all well versed or anything. He would always be like, man, I just don't know my stuff compared to how you know your stuff. But it's like, no, I don't even think that's really the point. I just want to know where you're at, you know what I'm saying, and what you believe. And obviously there's a lot of differences that we have. But I do think, and this could be controversial too, I think, but there in the world of, I guess in the world religions, I will say that there is a starting place, bro, for everybody. Like it's not the same for in between faiths, but I think if you went one by one and sat with somebody of opposite faiths, there is a starting place somewhere. Like, okay, we both agree that like there is some, and it's to the basic of basics. Like we can both agree that there's some level of spiritual material, like something that small. Like we both can agree that there's like a spiritual experience we're able to have on earth as humans in our human bodies. And then be like, okay, we can agree on that, but this is where we veer right or left or different paths. This is where we go off. And I want to know from your perspective why you choose left. And I'm sure you want to know from my perspective why I choose right. And so that is a lot of times something to think on when you're having conversations with people of other religions. Because I think there is a beautiful, interesting starting place somewhere. And it's not always an agreement, but it's something. And to Keyshawn's point, he said, is that the beginning of apologetics of having those conversations? Yeah, absolutely. I think apologetics is really helpful in those spaces. And I do want to say this too, man. Like, I don't I think apologetics is helpful and it's useful. And I would encourage anybody to get into it if you have the resources and if you can get in it. But I won't always say that it's something that is mandatory. I mean, I think there's a history of people who we would now say they were moving apologetically, but at the time they didn't even know what that really was to the extent that we know it as today. They just went into, Paul went into synagogues. Obviously, apologia is the word that he uses when we're talking about reasoning. So of course he probably had some understanding of it with all the studying he did. But I don't know if Peter did. I don't know if if the rest of the apostles and disciples did, but yet they were still able to reason with people, reach people, and have conversations and spread the gospel.
Let me throw this out there too. Yeah. I think a lot of men are like well-meaning men are like me, and they miss it with the apologetics, because I do think there is a good space to understand what you are experiencing and how to defend it. But this is how I take that. And I would love to get your guys' thoughts on it. Most people think they need to defend maybe some of the facts of their faith. They need to defend the historicity of Jesus. They need to defend maybe some of the philosophical arguments from Christianity, but that's not their faith. And you have so many people memorizing PowerPoints and all of these arguments from a faith they really haven't experienced. Like, they genuinely haven't experienced love, joy, peace, because they're so busy arguing with people on the internet because they want to prove themselves to God and have this right understanding of something that they don't live on a day-to-day. And I was in a lot of these communities. I was this guy trying to master all the apologetics and reading all the books. And I was missing simple things like loving the people I was arguing with. And when I really look back on it, I was more so trying to be right than I was trying to really understand someone and get God, get love to him, get God to him, because I didn't really have that. And I was more so trying to defend the cool kids club than really have a spiritual experience. And I think sometimes we forget that, and we're more so trying to reason against other faiths or against someone else's belief instead of reasoning and explaining and defending the spiritual experience that they have on a day-to-day. So I think it's easier to reason that when you've actually experienced it and defend that versus go reading a book on the historicity of Jesus, memorizing those facts and arguing that with an atheist. Why don't you really know what it's like to go out there and die to yourself, pick up your cross, and to stop looking at people as selfish objects that you need to win over, but yet people that are going through the same fight as you, same struggle, and you can understand, love, and relate to people on that level, and more so reason with people why it makes sense to love and be in unity instead of just divisive. Explain and reason with people why you have this patience that might transcend their understanding. I think that is the stuff that we need to know how to not argue with it. That's stuff we need to know how to explain to people that have questions, not this members only experience that we just really don't understand because we think we earned something because we went to church and raised our hand and walked to the front. And we're like, woo, cool. I'm saved now. Now let me explain to you why you got to go do the same thing, versus having that real life-changing experience with God that you almost don't have to argue. People are like, yo, how do I get what you got? What do y'all think on that?
I have, yeah. No, I think that's good. The only variance that I would have, thought that was excellent. The only variance that I would have, D, is I think it depends on the audience. I think it depends on the conversation. Because I think if you remove it from all conversations, I think you can also miss an opportunity for someone to continue to live in their misunderstanding. So I really believe that it depends on the circumstance or the situation. But to your point, I believe that you're right. The majority of people who do apologize, especially what you see online, especially these debates that you see, I think that a lot of them are highly arrogant, and they do miss the point, to be quite honest with you. But I do, however, believe that there are some of those people, like, for example, again, he's still my dude, as crazy as that whole situation went down. Ravi Zacharias, man, completely transformed my Christianity. I never knew somebody who could stand in the face of such amazing questions from people. And honestly, I didn't see them as amazing questions. I would be more on the side of where you thought, of where you were saying initially, right? Where I was like, I'm ready to bust you in the head with this boulder of this theological, deep, exegetical, hermeneutical, homiletical, Greek, Hebrew, from back in the day truth. I'm getting ready to smash everything that you just said. So that would have been more, because that was the culture of the Western culture, is to come up with that, is not to dialogue, not to understand, but to belittle, berate, to bemoan, to destroy, as opposed to reveal, right, God's love. So Ravi was so life-changing for me, because that brother, like I said, he would be like, so I heard what you said. However, to get there, you have left this here. So we have to travel here in order to get to where you're going. Do you see this? Do you see that so I love this, because Ravi, or then he would ask those questions, he would start talking about empirical things and all this other kind of stuff. I'm like, empirical? What that got to do with the text, right? I'm up here typing it. And it was like those things where he was like, so in order for you to believe what you believe, you have to believe that what's being said, right, is somehow just completely untrue. So how do you know, right? Like, this is untrue. How did you come to the place to know that your argument against this is that it doesn't exist, that this couldn't happen, and so on and so forth? So he was so brilliant, man, in his response, that I think that you have to know your audience. And most importantly, I agree with you. I think you have to know your heart in the approach to that person. That's hence the question to whoever asked that. Was it Twister that asked that? How do I do it? I think, man, you have to go deeper with people. You can't just be on the surface with people. You can't just be like, oh, they just don't want Jesus. Because that's just Western Christian church. They just don't want Jesus. No, they got legitimate questions. They have legitimate stuff that they need answers to. And we should be versed enough, prayed up enough, read enough, studied enough, and to be able to have the capacity to sit with somebody who doesn't see something the way that we see it, and they have questions about it.
Right. No, actually, I like that. Maybe after hearing you say that, I would probably rephrase it as like, we need to understand that, I guess everything I ranted on is the starting space of the faith, and definitely not to say that there isn't a need for like legit intellectual conversations, because I actually think that's a starting space for some people, is to kind of understand maybe some of the evidence that's out there for God and how practical it is, where you can see God through history, through science, all of these things. And then, but it's just important to make sure you get that first part, because even when you win someone over intellectually, that still isn't God, right? Like, once they believe that, like, oh, this evidence leads to something, a bigger thing, that's still not an experience with God, right? When you can understand that something's there. And I think almost some people are okay with just that, because I can play for this team. And by this team, I mean, like, all right, I believe in the Christian stuff and I'm on that team. But if you don't go for that first part, you miss the whole point. I think you miss the faith entirely, because God is trying to have an encounter with your soul on a very deep, almost world-shattering level. But you can still keep all of your selfishness, but still play for the Christian team. Does that make sense? Yeah. And I think that's where most people try to sit, because it's safe, where they can clearly articulate and argue for God without fully living for him.
Yeah.
And I think the paradox of Ravi Zacharias, as you brought up paradox, is that I genuinely believe, I think some people will question, I I just think the way that he talked, I think he had such amazing insight from God. Like, I think he genuinely had some real experiences with him. And that's where the beauty of his words came from. How you reconcile that with what he did is very interesting, but he wouldn't be the only biblical character.
I'm going to speak to it. I'm going to speak to it real quick. I think the brother was saved, and I think he had a lifelong issue with lust and sex and women. I do. But you cannot talk about God like that and not have encountered God.
Facts. I believe that.
There's no way. There's no. This dude wasn't gonna argue with you. This dude wasn't gonna belittle you. Wasn't gonna tear you down. But this brother had that. He had that David syndrome. Y'all do know that David struggled with lust
exactly what I was thinking about.
Life. His whole life. I believe that Zacharias had the same issue there. And I believe that he was a victim of his own spiritual insight of the things that God gave me. Do you know that when God says, guys, when Paul says, hey, if you would just take away this thorn from my flesh. Do you know the Bible doesn't tell us what this thorn is? But do you listen to why God said he won't take it away?
That's my grace is sufficient.
No, because of the surpassing great knowledge that I have given you.
Oh,
what?
That's different.
He's like, nah, because you need this to keep you humble. I believe the same.
That's why great ugly.
Man.
That's
gotta depend on him. Gotta depend on him.
You see him just coming to grip with it, PD. He was like, wow.
Dang. Man. I just gotta depend on him.
Because
it's the
he's so
wisdom.
far ahead of us at our age. Like, God's doing some amazing things, but that's just why you're a little funny.
It make up for the deficit.
Sense. Wow.
It make up for the deficit. You know what I'm saying?
Wow.
Yeah.
I didn't mean to catch that straight. I think
really,
it's the beat. It's the Kendrick Drake beat. I think it just got me
cool.
turned up for no reason.
I'm in the booth tonight. You don't even gotta worry about it. You gonna wake up in the morning.
The Williams.
Wow.
Your name gonna be trending. I'm coming after everything. Yeah. This the context. Y'all this is the context. You don't gotta go no further. This conversation right here. Yeah, you ain't gotta trip. Yeah, it makes sense. You know what I'm saying? The wisdom. Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. I would say and what was crazy, I was thinking real hard on what I could say about him. I just couldn't come up with it fast enough. Like it caught me off guard. I mess with Robbie, man. Like, and I think Robbie's, I still bought, some of his books, read those. Cause I really do think, man, and I don't necessarily want to say it's a maturity thing, cause I want to be so sensitive to it, because we don't want to ignore the people that were impacted by his decisions. But I don't think we are. Yeah. And I don't think we are. No, I don't think we are. But I think one of the things that struck me so much outside of how well he was able to argue and defend the faith, because I had my moments. I remember specifically being in Instagram DMs with an individual who had commented on a post I had made, and bro, we were going back and forth. I mean, voice note after voice note. I was going back through notes, everything I was writing down. I was like, oh, this gonna get him right here. And I remember Robbie said that, so I'm gonna get him right there. This gonna get him all the way. And we never went anywhere. It was just back and forth. And my words ended up getting misconstrued, for, whatever. He was just twisting and turning stuff and assuming and all that kind of stuff. And so eventually the conversation ended, right? But I mean, I've had multiple conversations like that. And so that's kind of where I learned, like, bro, this, like, it's got to be more than just all these lists of arguments I could find to make this make sense. But I think one of the things that stuck out to me so much, and it's so crazy and ironic, but his conversations on pleasure, man. blew my mind. I mean,
unreal.
Like the fact that he was able to say like, yo, I forget exactly how it's quoted too, but I typically remember it. I think he said something like experiencing pleasure at the cost of violating someone else is illicit pleasure. He said something along those lines.
You got to know he's speaking of his own struggle at this time.
Right. That's what's so crazy. You know what I mean? And to have so much wisdom that impacts other lives and you be in the midst of living that in that moment. Like that's all God, you know, like to still use someone who is in the midst of the very battle that they're speaking to, and the wisdom transcends. Like that is a whole different level. And so I think that is what's transformational for me.
Yeah, and in the most fluffed up way, it's almost encouraging because that is the human relationship with God. And we see all of our favorite Bible characters outside of Jesus, where it's like, dang, and God's still using you. As you just sitting there, watch Abraham, Ninja, keep lying. You like, what? And it's this weird. And I say this all the time as the coach, man. As a coach, some of my most powerful lessons that I just be speaking and hearing as I'm watching a man receiving, and it's just changing his whole perspective. I'm like, I learned that fluffing up. Like I didn't learn that with the amazing spiritual download. Like I learned that patience I just kicked to you by being impatient with my wife, and it cost me big time, right? Or I learned this business advice I gave you by doing the opposite. And so as ironic as it is, and that's why it's just so weird that we live in the culture that's so quick to write people off. That is kind of the irony. It is somewhat, in a sense, hypocritical if he's, again, I think he would only tell you not to do some of the things that he was doing. But the reason he understands it so well is probably that pain that I remember some of the hearing about some of the emails back and forth between the woman. It's like he was probably not able to sleep at night. He was not able to get any type of peace. And that's where his clarity on the issues came from. And so I think the encouragement for the people listening is it's like, man, as you fluff up, it's not that God was looking for you to be perfect in general for you to use you. And you don't need to stay perfect for him to use you. Right. This isn't a license to do whatever we want either. Right. But it's just that God is teaching you in the wins and the losses, not just everything that you get right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That's good. Yeah, I really like Twister said Dion is so far ahead, and clearly his thorn in the flesh is that bully mentality. Don't even trip. It's gonna be a holy diss track. Everybody gonna be available to listen to it. Gonna have meet the Williams. That's what it's gonna be. Shoot, let's get to these Twitch chat thoughts, man. Y'all had some good ones in here. So McDuggett says wisdom isn't application of knowledge itself. Wisdom is the application of knowledge itself. But you also have to ask the question, which I think is a part of our conversation. What type of knowledge are you applying? Whose knowledge are you applying? And the resources of said knowledge, right? Catch it. All right. We was just obviously around the space there. You can gain knowledge of all the lines that Kendrick and Drake are spitting as they're rapping these diss tracks to each other, right? Go word for word, bar for bar, and just get all that knowledge. If you begin applying that into your life based on the things that they're doing or they're accusing each other of doing, that's not good. Like that, yes, that is applied knowledge, but that is not a wise thing to do, because you're going to end up in great trouble. I mean, God knows where, anywhere but freedom. Let's just say that. So I think in much respect, it's just as important to know where the roots of the knowledge is and where you're applying it, whose knowledge you're applying. That's what makes the difference. And so then again, that compares the worldly wisdom to more so of the biblical wisdom. Biblical wisdom comes from an everlasting truth. Worldly wisdom comes from, momentary facts, opinions, and in some cases a truth, but it's not the entire truth. And so I think that's perhaps something to consider. If you had any thoughts on that, PD, go for it.
Nope.
Cool. Shout out to Huffing and Puffing with the quote there. Fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the holy is understanding. I love it. Nicole says, I believe you already have wisdom. In Exodus, when God said he imbued his spirit of wisdom of craftsmanship in certain people to build the temple, and there were those who had different roles in building the temple. I've started praying, Father, with the wisdom you have already given me, help me with the understanding of the wisdom, and by your perfect will, I learn and gain a better understanding. I've also seen that wisdom is used for your future and benefiting your future, and knowledge and understanding is used in present or past. Very interesting. I think that's a interesting thought. I don't think I have any.
Well, I kind of would jump off a little bit where he said that specific people were given wisdom on certain things. So I don't know that we're all given no, I do believe that we're all given wisdom. I don't believe that we all practice wisdom. So we take from the Old Testament, go to the New Testament. Again, the question that James asks us in chapter number 2 is if you lack wisdom. So there is a practical spiritual wisdom, but there is some things that you will encounter that will be difficult, because as you continue to read through James, you start to see that James goes into a troubled situation. And basically, God tells him that you're not on trial. What you believe is on trial. Your faith is on trial, right? So there's a different wisdom that's needed for you to navigate that situation, especially when the going gets tough and it's very difficult, because you're like, hey, like what is actually going on here? This is very difficult. So yeah, interesting though. I like it.
Yeah, interesting thoughts. So I think that's about it.
That's
cool.
Shout
out to John S. He said, need prayer in that for myself. It's truly a spiritual battle. If you can, we'll just keep you lifted in prayer. I don't know exactly where you were referring to. We definitely talked about a lot up to this point. But man, we'll definitely keep you lifted in prayer for wisdom, spiritual battle, a lot of things going on there.
100%.
Definitely keep you lifted in prayer there. So we're going to close things out. See if we have any homework in the chat. Shout out David and Baca in the building. He says the biggest thing that stood out to me this week was Isaiah 48, 17, 18, where God pretty much describes his ways being the best for us. Growing up, it was easy for me to see God's ways as just strict rules for us to be churchy, and never understood the value in them. But it's really about a relationship built on love. Built on love, not rules. And when you can love God, you begin to love his ways. And even statistically speaking, practicing Christians are less likely to be divorced, less likely to be overweight, more likely to be in above average income, more likely to donate to charity, and more. Anyways, this is all a good reminder that God's ways are not only good, but just make sense to live by. The more I live, the more I realize God's ways lead to the most amount of peace and human flourishing. I felt like I just talked to Ruslan on that note. So I love it. I love the thoughts right there, David. Shout out to Baca there. He kind of made some notes here. Idols, a big problem for the Israelites were the idols that they had, but God said he will not share his praise with the carved idols. Is there anything in life where it's taking up time with God, or is there anyone or anything that you're going to before God? It's a great question. Another thing is that we see God's grace, love, mercy, forgiveness, and faithfulness. Even though Israel was loath to and disobeyed God still said he will let them be free from the captivity that's coming. And none of the new age things, crystals, tarot cards, star signs, etc., are things that are going to help you. Only God. For God's own sake, he saves us, not because of anything we did, but only because of him and what he has done. No, we don't deserve anything. But still, God gave his son. He always has been and will be graceful, merciful, and awesome. So good stuff there. I definitely appreciate you guys dropping that homework. We're going to definitely keep up the reading there. If I can remember, I believe it was Isaiah 43 through 49. So we have Isaiah 50, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, Isaiah 50 through 55, I believe is what we're reading. So you guys come back and share some thoughts there. I know there's at least 63 chapters of Isaiah. I don't know how many more after that, but we're coming close to the end, man. And I'm excited to see what you guys definitely pull away from the full book. And if you're new, if you haven't been tagging along with us, please jump in, man. Pick up on Isaiah chapter 50, or, start at the beginning of the book and just update us as you're journeying. We've just been reading through the Bible. Man, it's been how long now, PD? It's been well over a year, huh? Like,
easily over a year.
Yeah. So we just been taking our time, man, slow pace, a chapter a day, and reading.
And that shouldn't be hard to do. Like, you can carve out some time for that, for sure.
Absolutely. What, a chapter a day? Come on now. Yeah. That's the least you can do. So many ways to do it, reading it, listening to it. I mean, we taking it lightly over here in terms of the homework. Man, we could definitely be assigning some heavy loads, but we know it's important to take our time with these things. So a chapter a day. Be sure to jump in, get that in. We would love to hear your thoughts back on the homework coming in the next week, and just continue finding things that you can apply from what you're reading. So again, man, we appreciate you guys so much. Let me get Luke real quick, because you're here. My man, I appreciate you. So man, we appreciate you guys so much for another conversation. Tonight was fantastic. Absolutely enjoyed it. Don't forget to leave a like on the video on YouTube. Be sure to jump in, man. We got so much stuff going on Maverick.tv you want to be a part of, and excited to catch you guys next week. And as always, until then, God first, God bless.
Peace.
Look out for that diss track too.